Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Growing Through Apprenticeships, How to Support Aspiring Teachers Through Federally Funded Teacher Residency Opportunities, brought to you by Pathways Alliance webinars and National Center of Grow Your Own. Today's agenda, we will be welcoming our guest, we will be talking about the Tennessee story and apprenticeships, and we will also have a Q&A and next steps. Hi, my name is Sabrina Baptiste. I am the Program Operations Director for Innovate EDU's Lab Core Fellowship and the co-project manager for Pathways Alliance. And welcome to, again, Growing Through Apprenticeships, How to Support Aspiring Teachers Through Federally Funded Teacher Residency Opportunities. Today, we have the pleasure of having David Donaldson from National Center of Grow Your Own and Executive Director of Innovate EDU, Erin Moat, who will have today's conversation about growing your own apprenticeship. Before we get into this hot topic, we ask all of our members to please take a moment and all of our participants to sign up for Pathways News. At the bottom of our site, you will find and be able to sign up and access Pathways Alliance webinars and our Pathways Alliance Resource Digest that is curated for wonderful news, resources, articles, and more. This month, our digest features apprenticeships. Next month, our digest will feature staff well-being and staff retention. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Erin Moat and David Donaldson.
Well, hi, everybody. Welcome. Depending on what time zone you're in, good morning, good afternoon, good night. And really excited for this conversation today. If you haven't already seen, the Pathways Alliance hosted another webinar on apprenticeships a little over a month ago, which was really a broad scale overview. And we heard from so many of you. We want to go deeper. We want to learn more. We want to do something. We want to hear some of the tips, the tricks, the tactics. What are people's experience? How do I get deeper into this? And we've had just so much interest in this topic of apprenticeships. And so I am super thrilled to welcome David, who honestly is the maven in Malcolm Gladwell world of apprenticeships. Maybe we could get you a business card that says apprenticeship maven. But really excited to welcome you. It's such a hot topic right now, apprenticeships. And, you know, this is really going to be a great and I think deep conversation about this opportunity for educator prep programs. Let me tell you a little bit about David so he doesn't have to be humble. David was the Chief of Human Capital at the Tennessee Department of Education. In that role, he launched several statewide programs, including Grow Your Own, Aspiring Assistant Principal Network, and Diverse Leaders Network. He created a free additional endorsements program in SPED and ESL for over 5,000 educators. During his tenure, Tennessee ranked number one, not number two, number one for prioritizing educator diversity and equity by the Education Trust. That's a huge, huge accomplishment. He was the lead author on the approved application by the U.S. Department of Labor to federally recognize the K-12 teacher occupation as eligible for apprenticeships. He has been a teacher in Baltimore. Whoop, whoop. I still hold my 443 area code, so love that. A principal in Detroit, where I went to school at the University of Michigan. And he's an administrator in New York City, which Innovate EDU calls home. So David's one of the family. Welcome, David, to this conversation today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Erin. Thank you for having me into Pathways Alliance, and also to Sabrina and Jonathan for all the helping getting this off the ground today. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Before we get started, David, I would be remiss if I didn't just say there's a lot going on in the world today, and in education and frankly in our space this week. And I just want to pause as a leader of an organization that works on social justice and equity issues and just give our participants a moment to reflect and center themselves before we jump into this conversation. So we're going to just take a brief minute for a pause. Thank you all. And you should take space if you need it during this webinar, and we welcome anyone to take space. David, I'd love for you to just jump right in and tell us in depth, don't leave out any of the details, the Tennessee story.
Sure. So again, thanks so much for having me. I'm going to dive in, but before I do, just for those who may have seen some version of this, please know that I think it's really important for me to set the context here. But the second half of this presentation will be all brand new material, specifically on registered apprenticeships. So with that said, the background here, what were we trying to address in Tennessee? Well, we were trying to remove financial barriers to become a teacher. We were also trying to address vacancies, specifically within special ed and ESL, which made up over 20% of the vacancies we had in the state. We were also trying to eliminate the concept of a first-year teacher. So how could we better prepare you so that you would truly be more than just day one ready to be a teacher of record? We also had significant educator diversity issues, just like the rest of the country. So how could we do a better job in getting aspiring educators who more closely reflected the students they were serving? And then also we have 42 ed prep providers in the state of Tennessee. Let's just be honest, not all are created equal. And so how could we fix some quality issues there, as well as we have a lot of districts where the closest EPP might be over an hour away, a lot of our rural districts. So we have what we refer to as EPP deserts. So how can we make sure that they're getting access to high quality EPPs? So what we ended up doing here is that we actually created a Grow Your Own grant program. As part of this grant, which EPPs applied to, there were requirements. First requirement being you got to be able to become a teacher for free and get paid to do so. So no out-of-pocket costs for the candidates if they were going to be in this program. Second, all aspiring educators in the Grow Your Own grant would graduate dual endorsed in either special ed or ESL. So the district and the EPP could say, we're going to focus on elementary education, but then they had to add special ed or ESL to be a part of this program. Clinical practice, or otherwise known as student teaching in Tennessee policy, is only 15 weeks. I'm somebody who did TFA, so only 5 weeks. And so what we decided to do was say, to participate in this program, we're extending clinical practice to a minimum of 2 years if a bachelor's degree program, and minimum 1 year if master's degree program. We also incorporated diversity into the rubric, so making sure that districts were selecting candidates that were more diverse than their current teacher workforce. And then finally, one of the ways that we increased access to high quality EPPs was by allowing and promoting and encouraging that the programs be online. So now a university like Austin Peay State could be serving people 4 to 5 hours away, as well as this would eventually allow us to potentially bring out-of-state EPPs to serve our aspiring educators. So what this led to was that 65 districts partnered with 14 ed prep providers to offer opportunities for just over 670 people to be able to become a teacher for free and get paid to do so. We also dramatically lowered our cost of the EPPs. We had the all-in cost for a bachelor's or master's degree of just under $10,000. We actually had some of our providers as low as $6,000, but for political reasons and certain conditions you need to be thinking about, is we had some private universities who did lower their costs, but we'd still pay about $15,000 or $17,000 for people to go through some of those. I'm going to talk about this more later, and this is why you're all here, the U.S. Department of Labor, the application process that this led us to pursue. But before I do, just a couple other quick things. What we ended up seeing was an increase in the diversity of the enrollees at the EPPs in this Grow Your Own program. And because I mentioned there was 14 EPPs selected, but we had 42 in the state, we now saw these 14, which were some of our higher performing ed prep providers, starting to serve more candidates. And then finally, just words of wisdom, piece of advice, make sure you don't repeat same mistakes I did. If you're ever going to offer programs for aspiring educators specifically, where they can, no tuition, no debt, and they're getting paid, make sure you're thinking about what are you doing for your current educators? One of the potential pushbacks will be with Grow Your Own programs is, how come they get to go to school for free? How come you're paying for them, but I'm still paying off my student loan debt? So that's why, as Aaron mentioned in introducing me, we offered programs like free additional endorsements for teachers, as well as free master's degrees in school leadership. So finally, in the last slide here on my end, is that ultimately at the time, Tennessee was not a state apprenticeship agency state. It is now, but at the time it was not. What this means is that we had to go through the US Department of Labor to establish the occupation of a K-12 teacher to be eligible for apprenticeship. Tennessee could not determine in and of itself that that occupation would be eligible. So this took us 2 presidential administrations, 4 applications, meaning I was denied 3 times, so the 3rd time was not the charm, and 15 national letters of support. And I know a lot of Pathways Alliance members actually provided some of those letters, so I'm eternally grateful for that. My really bad joke here is that because of how long it took and that it went through the Department of Labor, this was truly a labor of love to get this done. Somebody else has suggested I would say that this was a very labor-intensive process. That tells you the kind of humor I have and why this is probably my last slide. But all that being said, the occupation of a K-12 teacher was approved right around Thanksgiving in November 2021. It is the first federally recognized program or occupation, and then the program between Clarksville, Montgomery County Schools, who are absolutely amazing, and that is where this work started. Shout out to Millard House and Sean and Petrus over there. Millard's now the superintendent in Houston, but just amazing leadership there. And then Austin Peay State was their partner. That's where the work started. We actually was very blessed to inherit when I came into Tennessee. Work was already happening there, but they're the ones that have the first program approved. The reason why the US Department of Labor is such a big deal is that now any state is able to do this. So I want to always make sure I'm giving credit where credit's due. In our application, we actually referenced the state of Pennsylvania. They actually applied, they were a state apprenticeship agency state, and had actually put in the work to establish the occupation. They just never actually registered anybody for it, but they did actually work on this prior to us. What we were able to do, we did not invent Grow Your Own. We didn't invent registered apprenticeship, but we were the first to get it through the US Department of Labor. And so now any state can do this. And that's where we're going to get into, I think, some Q&A about what does this all mean. And I think the number one question that I get, and we'll get into it, is just tell me about the funding and what does this potentially mean within that space. And we're going to speak more to that as we go on. So thank you.
Great. Well, David, people like the humor so far, so that's so keep the jokes coming. So just as like table stakes, I think it would be really great if you could define apprenticeship for folks on the call.
Sure.
And what should people be thinking about when they hear the word apprenticeship?
Yeah, so it's actually funny you say what should they be thinking about. When Clarksville, Montgomery, and Austin Peay approached me about the idea of apprenticeship, the first words out of my mouth were, what is an apprenticeship? I mean, I understood the general concept, getting time under a mentor, but what did this actually mean? So this will probably be potentially the most boring portion, but I just want to make sure I'm referencing the language correctly. So these definitions come from the US Department of Labor as well as apprenticeship.gov, and I have 3 things to share. So a registered apprenticeship, which you'll often see just as a RAP, RAP, is a proven model of apprenticeship that has been validated either by the US Department of Labor or a state apprenticeship agency. The second thing that I want to hit on is a youth apprenticeship program. That is one that I'm getting a lot lately about the youth. And so what that is simply any registered apprenticeship program, so any RAP, just as I defined above, in which the employer specifies in the apprenticeship agreement that individuals age 16 and above may participate. I want to be very clear, this is not part of the definition, but if you are 16 or 17, you are going to need a parent or guardian signature or permission to participate in this. And then finally, the third definition that I just want to share is pre-apprenticeship. And that is a program or set of strategies designed to ultimately prepare individuals for entry into a registered apprenticeship program. Pre-apprenticeships can last a few weeks to a few months. The big difference here when you hear about pre-apprenticeships, especially within high school age, is that it's not required that they are paid. And so that is something that folks may want to be thinking. We'll talk more about that you may want to do a pre-apprenticeship in high school, potentially, that leads upon graduation to a registered apprenticeship program. So those are the three main definitions that I just wanted to share. Registered apprenticeship program, a youth apprenticeship program, which is someone being able to be in a registered apprenticeship just starting at age 16, and then a pre-apprenticeship, which is basically preparing someone to enter and does not necessarily have the requirements that the individuals are paid during that process.
Really helpful. And Aaron, I see your question. We'll get to it in Q&A about the difference between apprenticeships and residencies. David, what are all the roles in an apprenticeship program?
Yeah, so there's three main roles in any apprenticeship. There is the employer, there is the related instruction provider, and there is the sponsor. When it comes to registered apprenticeships and teaching, the employer is always going to be the LEA, the district. It's who is employing the individual. Usually we recommend as a paraprofessional that is getting the training to become a teacher. The related instruction provider is who's providing the coursework. So it's always going to be the educator preparation provider. And then the sponsor. Now, this is the part where I get on my soapbox. So I want to be very clear. A sponsor can be flexible. A sponsor could actually be the EPP. It could be the LEA. It can be potentially a nonprofit organization or intermediate organization. There's different options for large states like California. You might consider having the county office of education be the sponsor. In Texas, where they have, and I apologize if I'm butchering this, but like regional service centers, or just those, in Michigan, we call them ISDs, intermediate school districts. Those could potentially be sponsors. But this is the soapbox part. I am a big, big, big advocate that the state education agency is the sponsor, or at least has a clear plan to approve or work with folks to be sponsors. And that is because the role of the sponsor is the one who, at the end of the day, is approving who can have the program be eligible for apprenticeship. And so there is just two things, like I think very strongly about from a quality control standpoint. One, like I do not identify as an instructional leader, but this is an opportunity for you to say as a sponsor, we are only going to approve registered apprenticeships and teaching that where the coursework, the related instruction provider, is training aspiring educators on the science of reading, or high quality instructional materials, or whole child support, social and emotional learning. Those are depending on the priorities of the state, but there's a chance to double down on those things. At the same time, there's things that we did with our Grow Your Own grant that, as I mentioned, we required everyone to graduate dual endorsed in either SPED or ESL. You can make those same requirements as a sponsor. You could say we want the clinical internships in teaching minimum 2 years, not just 15 weeks. So there's different things that the sponsor can insert guardrails and monitor quality control that I really push state education agencies to consider in this space. Otherwise, we are going to see a wild, wild west situation occur where you will have some entities who may be not the best and low quality using this to just hurry up and expand their programs and get more money. And it has nothing to do with changes to program or quality or things of that nature.
I really appreciate the attention there to guardrails and guidelines and the role that folks can have. So just like there are different roles in an apprenticeship program, there's also different types of apprenticeship programs. And I think these are the details that people really want to know, right? Can you tell me about what the different types of apprenticeship programs are?
Yeah, so there's 3 types. So those types are time-based, competency-based, and hybrid-based. So time's going to be having a minimum amount of hours that have to be hit. With competency, and that's actually what we did in Tennessee. The competencies that we put in place was saying, basically, you have to master all of these things in order to effectively, have completed the registered apprenticeship program. A hybrid program is actually just a combination of the two, of competency and of time. So you can put in requirements within both. I'll be very frank, competency made a lot of sense for what we were doing at the time in Tennessee. Because we were the sponsor, we knew that we would only be approving programs that were already in our Grow Your Own. So it meant that we weren't worried about time, because we knew that you couldn't even be considered unless it was minimum 2 years for a bachelor's degree program in student teaching, minimum 1 year. However, I think in hindsight, this is something that I would have probably done differently for the purpose of quality control or guardrails, because what I worry about, and this goes back to if states do not play the role of the sponsor, there will be people that are coming in and saying, well, wait, we're just going to do competencies, and state law or state policy only requires 15 weeks. So we're going to hurry up and do a 15-week competency-based registered apprenticeship. And if you don't have the time in there, there's a chance people will potentially take advantage of this. And so that's something that I just want to flag. I don't think there's anything wrong about time, competency, or hybrid in and of themselves, but they can be potentially abused if you are not thoughtful in who is the sponsor and how you set up and what you will approve and not approve. So that's just something that just want to flag as well. I just think this is a great opportunity, though, to take advantage of increasing the length of time. A true apprenticeship is taking the time to work under a master or mentor teacher and getting, it's basically betting on the best way to truly become a teacher is getting more time in a K-12 classroom as opposed to necessarily getting more time in a college classroom. I think that's just a very simplistic way to potentially consider it.
I love that. I also love the reflective practice and sort of lessons learned from doing that. I think folks on the call would love to hear if you have any more of those. But right now, can you talk to me about what you think is the desired length? You talked a little bit about this, right? About when we talked about the time and the context and the competencies and kind of some of the natural selections you made.
Yeah.
But as you're thinking about this idea of more time in the K-12 classroom than in the college classroom, and if 15 weeks isn't sufficient, so on and so forth, what does that look like? And what would you say on that regard?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the candidate, right? And so I think if I am a, graduating high school senior, I think there's nothing wrong with having them. Why can't they do 4 years of actual clinical internship while earning their bachelor's degree? How cool would that be? And so I apologize, but I'm gonna do my sports analogies. I have a baseball and basketball one. I'm gonna go with baseball, but Ichiro Suzuki is always my example. And so former Seattle Mariner, future Hall of Famer, but back when he first debuted in the major leagues, there was this big controversy. Is he a rookie or not? Because he had played for 7+ years in Japanese professional baseball league. So was it fair for him to be considered when he was dominating everybody, but he was older and more experienced? And I would say the people that didn't care was his team, the Seattle Mariners, because they had a player who was well more than just day one ready. He was an all-star from day one. So imagine getting as much as possible hands-on experience. The first registered apprenticeship program that was approved between Clarksville, Montgomery, and Austin Peay is 3 years. It's 3 years of clinical internship experience. They basically took a 4-year degree and modified it to be within 3 calendar years. So the folks are actually doing college coursework as well in the summer. But if you're somebody who's already been a paraprofessional and has had years of experience, already knows the community, already has a bachelor's maybe, it's just not in education, already has an associate's, I don't think you need 3 or 4 years for them. Can we do 2 years? Can we do 1 year if they already have a bachelor's and it's a 1-year master's? So I think and that's what's great about apprenticeships. You can customize these based on the needs you have. All it requires is, having an employer, having the relay instruction provider, and they customize the coursework based on what folks are bringing to the table as far as their coursework, as well as potentially based on the experience they are bringing to the table.
I love that because I think there's so many roles in schools that aren't just teachers, right? There's paraprofessionals, there's success coaches, there's tutors now more and more. And how are we thinking about the whole of the educator workforce and what pathways we're making available to the whole of the educator workforce? That's something we're really supportive of and interested in at Pathways Alliance. So hottest topic probably, and why maybe 50% of people are on this call: money. How Let's talk about funding. What are the types of funding that are available, and how would you differentiate between them?
Yeah. So, let me just start with the glass half empty, but just be very transparent because I don't like wasting anyone's time. In no way, shape, or form is registered apprenticeship, let alone grow your own, a silver bullet. And it's also, I want to be very, very clear, it is not a guarantee of funding. What it is it allows you to be eligible for a lot of funding that you currently are not eligible for. So I just want to be very, that's one of the first things I just want to get across. But let me now actually do the glass half full and tell you what all those possibilities are. So ultimately, in the most simplistic terms, registered apprenticeship is going to allow flexibility of current funding, as well as the opportunity to gain additional funding from the regional, state, and federal level. So let's start with regional. So just like a state education agency passes through over 80% of its dollars to local education agencies, school districts, state departments of labor basically do the same thing. But their pass through is to what are called regional workforce agencies or regional workforce boards, or in other cases, they're known as American Job Centers. And so once a program is approved for apprenticeship, the district and the EPP can go together to their regional workforce board and say, what money do you potentially have available for our apprentices or to cover our costs? These regional workforce boards are the same groups that pay for people to become plumbers, electricians, culinary arts, IT, so all other types of apprenticeships. So are you competing against other sectors? Yes. But at the same time, please know there's many really interesting and promising things within the apprenticeship space. One, everybody's trying to get their numbers up, because if your numbers are up, that means you can get more funding. So they want to, these regional workforce boards want to look successful to their state. Also, a lot of opportunities for emerging fields in apprenticeships. Or how do we get more people of color into apprenticeships? How do we get more women into apprenticeships? So there's always opportunities that might be unique to that group. One actual annual allocation source is WIOA, and that is Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. There is WIOA Youth Funds, there are WIOA Adult Funds, and there's also something known as WIOA Adult Displacement, I believe. Those are annual allocations. You can actually even Google it to find those, as well as see how much of those funds have been obligated versus how much have actually been spent. The reason I bring this up, they are very, very strict as far as their eligibility. It mainly is like a socioeconomic status. Oh, and I just got a comment. WIOA, WIOA, Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, but it is an annual allocation. The reason I bring this up is that if your apprentices are eligible, the flexibility of these funds is unparalleled. There is, and what I mean by this is these funds can be used to potentially cover childcare. They can be used to help get your car fixed if it breaks down and you're struggling to, make ends meet or whatever it may be. My point is allowability that no education funds have. So that's something that is potentially there. At the state level, so just as I mentioned, states pass through majority of their money to the regional workforce boards. They're still going to have their own money. So they're going to have their own initiatives, just like we would at the state level. And then also your governor may have certain pet projects that they want to see. If you Google your state apprenticeship grants, you'd be amazed at how many unique opportunities there are. And I think we're going to start seeing those, especially my guess is in the fall when, and this is where I'm not intentionally trying to be negative. I think I'm just a realist. I do think, unfortunately, teacher shortages will get worse before they get better. And I think you're going to see a lot of folks allocate or designate funding for registered apprenticeships and teaching once the problem is as clear as day in the fall. I think right now everyone's focused on how can we do as much before the first day of school. And then finally, federal. Now, I want to be very clear, not waste your time on this one. It is a Hail Mary, but the US Department of Labor just had a $113 million grant. And yes, you are competing against all other industries, you're competing against all other states, but you're competing, you're in the game, and you're in the game in a place where you weren't allowed to previously. And this $113 million one was specifically for emerging fields and apprenticeship. There is nothing more emerging than teaching right now, because there's literally only 3 in the entire country that are federally recognized. So this is like a great opportunity, and there'll be more opportunities in the future. I think there's no doubt this administration is very, very clearly dedicated to apprenticeships. So that's from the regional, state, and federal level. The next level of getting in the weeds, I want to talk about youth apprenticeship very quick and funding in that regard. One of the reasons why I think I push explored pre-apprenticeship if you're thinking youth, and it doesn't have to be, this is just one person's advice, and it doesn't, like, I'm really excited for people to prove me wrong and learn from other models. That's the best part of my job, is getting to see how all other states are implementing this work. But if you are a high school grow your own program or thinking about apprenticeship, my big push is first make sure you are exhausting all dual enrollment, dual credits, and early college funding. Like, I am pro getting kids college credit within high school as much as possible. But if you do the registered apprenticeship, now the district actually has to hire the students and pay them. And I'm not sure what that model would look like yet. I am in talks with some states that are potentially exploring that, but it might be a potential unnecessary cost or unnecessary burden if you're already reaping the benefits of dual enrollment, dual credit, early college. If that is something you've already exhausted those funds and you want to expand, or you do want to do youth apprenticeship, you believe in it, more power to you, but then run with it. But those are just some things you might need to be, thinking about. The reason I say some current funding would be able to become more flexible if you have a registered apprenticeship, specifically, I want to highlight here Perkins 5. And so in 2 different ways here. So one of the differences between Perkins 5 and Perkins 4 is that it increased the amount of state reserve funds that a state could set aside from 10% to 15%. And Perkins 5 also an annual allocation, so you know how much you have, and it's always going to come through with minor variable changes. And so being able to set aside 15% of that now to be able to invest in youth apprenticeships or grow your own programs in career and technical education, those are possibilities to explore. But also part of Perkins 5 is LEAs must submit work-based learning plans. And now they can add potentially registered apprenticeship and teaching if they wanted to, and use their allocation of the funds. So that's from a youth perspective when it comes to funding and apprenticeship. And then finally, back to more of a macro level. So I want to be very clear. The only way these programs are ever going to scale is if you are driving down the costs of the educator preparation provider. If you're paying $40,000 per candidate, you can have a registered apprenticeship program. You'll just have a cohort of 2. Like, it's not sustainable, and you're not really going to actually truly get kids the teachers they need and deserve. You're not going to diversify the profession. You're not going to have a game changer on your hands. I don't think everybody's going to get it down to $10,000, but it's possible. And even when I mentioned we had it as low as 6, this is not necessarily, I want to be very clear, it's not about just getting the cost down low. Quality matters. What true empowerment is having choice. And so in doing this competitive grant, I'll say this in 2 different ways. We started by doing the evil version of the golden rule. Whoever has the gold makes the rules. And these 42 EPPs bid against each other, and it turned into name that tune. But instead of I can name the song in 4 notes and someone else saying they can name it in 3, they would say for $100,000, because we did 20 grants of $100,000 in the first round, they would say, I can produce 8 teachers. Well, someone else said I could produce 9. Someone else said I could produce 10. And a district had the choice. They were empowered to say, we're going to work with the one doing 8. Even though it's fewer people, that EPP has the best Spanish program in the state. And that's our need right now. And that's a great option to have. That's true empowerment. And we knew we were still getting a great deal of 8 teachers for $100K. So I want to emphasize the driving down costs. With that said, I really think that before you even pursue registered apprenticeship, how at the state level, how are you making sure you're already taking advantage, specifically over the next 2 years, of your ESSER funds? How are you using Title II, Title III, IDEA, your state general funds, Perkins 5, and then you might want to explore apprenticeship funds. And the reason I say this is, ESSER is going to go away, but use your ESSER now to get these programs off the ground. And then during the next 2 years, get those programs registered for apprenticeship while also figuring out how can I allocate my Title II, Title III, IDEA funds that are annual allocations. The only thing that I would add differently if I'm a district and thinking about this, because a district over the next 2 years can apply to register their program for apprenticeship, is the first funding source a district should use, even before ESSER, I believe, is take any teaching position that is currently vacant. And what are you using those funds on right now? Because those funds should be used to pay for paraprofessionals, school bus drivers, cafeteria workers, whoever it is you're going after. Those should be used to cover tuition. That's obviously not a sustainable source because ideally you're going to fill those positions. But while you have it, use that money now, use ESSER, and then move towards sustainable funding sources while you can. So I'll stop there for fun. I know that was super long-winded, but I want to hit on all those different things that I have seen or heard or that have been helpful in my learning thus far.
Well, everybody likes to talk about money, so it's fine if that's the long answer. So just real quick, because we have so many questions, and I knew this was going to happen. We have so many questions in the chat, so I'm going to make the last question from me just a bit of a lightning round. But if you could, in a couple, let's say like 3 minutes, tell me like the things you're most excited about and what are the bright spots. You've mentioned a couple already, but it would be great to hear the things that are really top of mind for you and where folks could look to find those bright spots.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super excited, just innovation in general. Specifically, I want to give a shout out to Secretary Cardona. 8 weeks ago, he called for all 50 states to set up a registered apprenticeship in teaching. And I think, and there might be a question in here, in doing so, I think we're going to be able to see more work by amazing organizations like NCTR be able to spread because we're going to hopefully see more money go into the ed prep space and districts and states spending money on this because they're going to ideally access more funds. So I'm a big fan of innovation. I'm also a big fan that in those 8 weeks, we've met with 26 state education agencies. And so we're seeing that interest, that desire, that proactiveness. And so I think there's a lot of positive leading indicators in this space that will hopefully lead to better prepared folks, more diverse folks, fewer vacancies in the long run. I've expressed my concerns, but I want to focus on the positive in this scenario. We also, West Virginia last week got their program, a program of theirs registered for apprenticeship. Wyoming is really trying hard to launch a pilot this fall. So that's encouraging to see. And just based on our conversations, I think we're going to have a lot more coming over the coming months. It's just what I'll just say, and I'll stop with this for this question is, I think with charter schools and with tutoring, I think there's good charters and there's some bad charters. I think with tutoring, there's a lot of good tutoring, a lot of bad tutoring. When I talk to people about Grow Your Own, we'll have people say, oh, we have a Grow Your Own program. We do a career day for kids in middle school about considering being a teacher. And I'm like, that's great. But yes, and like, how are you guaranteeing that they'll actually become a teacher by paying for them and all that stuff? So there's no shared definition of Grow Your Own. With registered apprenticeship and teaching, we can have a shared definition because it is new, which means let's make sure we do not screw this opportunity up. Never let a crisis go to waste. And so that's why I push really hard on that quality control guardrails. This is our opportunity to get something right that can change the way we prepare teachers. Who gets to be prepared, which I think there's thousands of people that solely due to financial barriers are not teachers today, and that fundamentally is not fair. And our whole organization, we're very Don Quixote-esque. We're going to dream that impossible dream. We want to live in a world where aspiring educators can become a teacher for free and get paid to do so. So that's what inspires me.
That's awesome. And our colleagues at LPI, particularly Dr. Desiree Carver-Thomas, talks a lot about those barriers, right? And this sort of like this untapped potential. And if we could just pay attention to some of the things that stop people from becoming teachers, it would be incredibly impactful to diversity, to quality, and so many other pieces. We're going to get to questions now. The first question is early in our conversation when you were describing apprenticeships. Aaron wanted to know, how would you compare apprenticeships to residencies, teacher residencies?
Yeah, so I would say that all residencies have the ability to be registered apprenticeships, but not all registered apprenticeships are necessarily residencies. And so let me just take you back to when we went over time versus competency-based versus hybrid. If somebody did a competency-based registered apprenticeship that only meets the state's minimum requirements, which could be 15 weeks. I think there's states that may even require only 13 weeks. Is that truly a residency? No, I don't believe it is. I believe a residency is a minimum year, and real, gradual, like getting the true experience. So I would say that's the most simplistic way of saying this. But what I would encourage is all residency should be strongly considering applying to get their programs registered for apprenticeship, because it can either potentially help make their models more sustainable or potentially allow their programs to expand. I am just a personal big believer that all the funding from apprenticeship, like the way this really can work best is if it covers the tuition. I just believe the district should always pay for the individual salary, and we did it via paraprofessional roles. That's what makes the program able to scale faster. But in general, we also reimagined the paraprofessional role based on really high quality residency programs, where one of my former jobs at a district was running talent for Detroit Public Schools. Favorite line in any job description is the last line, all other duties as assigned. So why are we not leveraging existing positions, reimagining them based on amazing lessons learned from residency-based models where the person's truly getting the experience? And the other thing really want to hit on is the mentor, right? There's too many places where someone's just assigned to a mentor based on seniority. And a lot of that can be in places where I've worked with that's collectively bargained because there's a stipend attached. But the second thing to consider is you might want to place somebody with highly effective teachers, but just because they're a highly effective teacher, they are a highly effective teacher of children, not necessarily adults. So make sure that as you're thinking of these programs, and I think residency models are a great example that have thought through this and we can learn a lot from them. How are you making sure they're under the right mentor and someone who's been trained in the coaching of adults, not just the teaching of students? Two different skill sets.
Thanks. And coming soon from Pathways Alliance, right? We're working on a national definition of teacher residency. So coming soon from a great working group in Pathways and chaired by our colleagues at Bank Street and NCTR. So trying to address some of the issues you're exactly talking about. I want to go to Bill's question because you just mentioned that. Bill is asking about how do you ensure high quality mentorship? So you just talked a little bit about this. Wanted to see if you had any other thoughts. Bill's question is, 2 years under a master teacher who is a skilled coach and a reflective mentor is very different than 2 years under a teacher who wanted extra time to grade papers while you teach. And I love the honesty, Bill. I think that's the real. How do you ensure that high quality mentorship?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the things that need to be, whether it's in the letter of agreement between whoever's providing the funding or the letter of agreement between the district and the EPP, but you got to make sure you're defining roles and responsibilities. Everything I said earlier, it's a yes and of, I really think there has to be intentional selection of the individuals, intentional training of the individuals, making sure they are compensated for their expertise as well. But so yes and to all those, and then making sure it's in writing, right? And making sure everybody knows what this is and what this is not, and how it is different potentially from other, like those are the things where you got to make sure, because everything sounds great that we're going to create pathways for you to get your degree paid for, and you'll get paid during it. But at the end of the day, if you're not implementing with fidelity, that individual within their first 5 years of being a teacher of record will still have a 50% likely, turnover rate if we're not changing the way we're truly preparing folks. And you're not changing the way by just having that person sit in the back of your classroom and grade papers. So great flag. The person, I guess it was a question, but that's really, I just want to say that's a great point and great flag that everybody needs to keep in mind in implementing these programs. So thank you.
Awesome. A question from Rosa, who said teaching credentials vary state by state. How does the DOL wrap account for that variance in terms of credentials?
I know people, I've been on webinars where people are asking about that and saying there should be universal reciprocity. Good luck. Like that, they're like the people you actually want to talk to is NASDAQ. I believe it's NASDEC, and I apologize, but they're ultimately the group that handles. And so as a former, sorry, about to geek out, and if I was a real geek, I would have remembered the acronym fully. But ultimately, it's the group that oversees state reciprocity agreements for teacher licensure. And I actually just saw a representative from there speak a few months ago at the National Educator Shortage Summit. And they basically were just like, look, every state is going to want to have its own policies for criminal background checks, or who is allowed to teach what, or were you properly trained? So we're just like, look, folks, Common Core, look how that went. Like, we're not going to have universal curriculums. We're not going to have universal licensures. What we are going to have is reciprocity agreements. So these programs will lead to a license in that respective state. So just like any other teacher in the state of Tennessee, they'll get their license. They're recommended for licensure from the EPP. Who will acknowledge that license is actually more on the receiving state. So I do not see any type of national designation, but I do see you will be eligible to work in that state, and then you can apply for state licensure in other states. And that's just kind of the way we are. Whether or not we should be that way, different conversation, different working group, different webinar, and a lot of people who feel strongly about that. The other thing too I'd add is just certain states want to have certain tests, whether it's Praxis, Pearson NES, their own state tests, where I'm born and raised Michigander. We have MTTC tests back there. So there's all these funny local contexts that play into why I don't foresee us having universal licensure.
We'll get you on a webinar to debate with John White. He's the former state chief in Louisiana. So that would be a great debate, David.
Oh, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see universal reciprocity as a former chief that was boarded by 8 states. I think I have a better chance wishing for something else, though.
Yeah, I hear that. Our colleague Xavier asked, you mentioned that one of the goals is to eliminate the concept of a first-year teacher. Can you talk more about that? And he thinks that it's critical that we become more intentional about the first-year teaching experience. Just pulling this thread here of intentionality from Bill's conversation about mentorship to some of the quality conversations we've had here to Xavier's comment just about the intentionality of the experience.
Yeah. So 2 totally different thoughts. One, I constantly would hear from districts all the time that these graduates, they're not prepared, they're not ready. We have to invest all this money in induction. I think you should be doing induction anyway. I think that's just a good onboarding and making sure they have a mentor even in your first year of teaching, and ideally extended. But that's something that we always heard, that they're just not ready and 15 weeks is not enough, right? On the flip side, I had the extreme pleasure of visiting a high school south of Nashville in another district, who they actually had a high school program where in 9th grade, teaching as a profession, 9th grade, they're exposed to concepts. 10th grade, they do some shadowing. But junior year and senior year, there's actually an early childhood center on the high school campus. And so these students are actually spending their junior and senior year, 1 period a day, teaching these little kids. And I swear, as a former principal and former head of talent at a district, and then even at the state level, they were more prepared than graduates from the EPPs because they had 4 years of which 1 year was shadowing, and then 2 years of legit full-time not full-time, but 1 period a day hands-on experience, which trumps 15 weeks anywhere you go. And so why would we then, those kids these high school graduates, if they did then choose to become a teacher, they were going to have to wait 3.5 years, their freshman, sophomore, junior, and then half of their senior year to then get back into a K-12 classroom? That makes no sense. Imagine if those high school graduates could then do their freshman year of college, sophomore year of college, junior, also getting student teaching experience, clinical internship. Why would we remove them from the actual practicality? So that's where we're like, that concept of a first year teacher is, how do we get you 2 or 3 or more years under your belt in front of kids before you actually become a teacher of record? That's where that comes from. That's the Ichiro Suzuki example. And to any of my basketball fans out there, I use a Tony Kukoc example from the Chicago Bulls. He is somebody who played against the '92 Dream Team as a member of Croatia. So he played against Jordan and Magic and Bird and all of them before eventually coming to the NBA. He wasn't too bad.
Yeah. I also think, just with everything going around and happening this week, that it's important that we talk about the school connectedness and the mental health piece of that work. That when folks have meaningful relationships with a variety of folks in education, what that can do for not only the teacher, the educator, but what that can also do for kids. Having that meaningful connection to a near peer or to someone else in the school building, and how important that is. And the CDC is telling us that right now, right? That school connectedness and mental health are deeply intertwined for our young people. And that connectedness could be to a high school student who's in that early childhood center and doing that. So just want to call that out. From Dave, what's the difference in how you market an apprenticeship program compared to a typical teacher prep program? And what have you learned about the market that can help fill spots and meet goals for diversity?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest differences is that if you are comparing a traditional EPP program or teacher prep program to an apprenticeship, the fundamental biggest difference is, in an apprenticeship, it is a earn and learn model. So you are getting paid. You have to get paid to be in that. That's just the most simplistic, basic difference there. As far as the actual coursework, there doesn't have to be a difference, but you get to actually be intentional, if you want, with the apprenticeship based on that sponsor of designing, hey, here's some of the things we might want to see different. Or so we had our traditional ed prep programs. We're still doing 15 weeks of student teaching, and we had Grow Your Own, which was a subset of which then those programs were the ones we were going to push to do to get them registered for apprenticeship.
Awesome. And I think this sort of answers Rose's question, which is, what's the value add for going through the process of registering an apprenticeship when programs still need to spend a lot of time and potentially money applying for grants?
So I think one of the first pieces of advice you might want to consider is actually just knocking on the door of your regional workforce board and just saying, hey, we have a really good ed prep program, or we're a district that's very interested in this. If we decide to put in the effort to pursue a registered apprenticeship, do you have funding potentially available? That might be something where, before you put in all the work, you might just want to have that simple conversation and just see, or do you have money for this fiscal year? Do you foresee having money in the future? Like, what could we potentially get out of this? Also, make sure you have that conversation with your state education department. Because if your state education department is going to be working on this, then that actually can make your job a lot easier, because they're the ones that are going to do majority of the heavy lifting and provide guidance and provide information. We tend to get brought in for states to get the program set up. And then once that is there, districts and EPPs can be like, okay, I see what I need to do to now get registered through the state. Got it. That's a possibility. So just those are two things I would say. Contact your regional workforce board, contact your state education department, see what their plans are, see what funding they may have or willing to allocate before you take a first step is something to consider.
So I just want to acknowledge we're not going to get to all the questions, but maybe just a quick lightning round real quick. From Courtney, do apprenticeships have to typically be employed? Benefits, wages, union memberships were relevant with the district during their apprenticeship?
Yes.
Great. From Tara, she said, thanks for sharing so much helpful information. Do you have any advice on how SEAs, state education agencies, and state labor agencies can collaborate on this approach?
Absolutely. There's no way this would have gotten done without our state labor. It's called the Department of Labor and Workforce. Tyra Kopis was her name in Tennessee. She is amazing. Ultimately, there are two, when it comes to actually designing the apprenticeship. So I mentioned the time competency hybrid, but there's two main parts. There's the related instruction coursework, which I mentioned is provided by the EPP, but there's also the on-the-job competencies that have to be designed. And so I really think in working with your Department of Labor, they are the people that will tell you, here's where the I's you got to dot, T's you have to cross when it comes to getting, this is the apprenticeship language, whereas I was the K-12 teacher language. And so it's a perfect partnership that you should strongly take advantage of. They're also the ones who are going to be able to talk to you about potential funding, introduce you to your regional workforce boards, tell you what money they have, tell you what the governor may be thinking of on their side of the shop. I am a huge fans of departments of labor. What I will say is that there are several states where I am meeting with the Department of Labor and they are not in conversation with the Department of Ed because the Department of Ed is not taking action. And the Department of Labor is like, this is a great opportunity. US Department of Labor is pushing this on us. And so that's just that, and that's been interesting to see departments of labor and the flag there. I love their enthusiasm. They want to see the numbers go up, but they don't know education. So they are more likely to potentially approve applications they get that might not meet bars that we would set for ourselves. So that's really, really like take advantage of your Department of Labor if you can, but please know, even if you're like, you better reach out to them at a minimum just to see who's contacting them. I have now been contacted in the last week by 3 US Department of Labor regional branches to ask for my help in supporting programs reaching out to them. I have flagged all of these for their state education departments. We'll see what happens.
Awesome. So we're not going to get to all the questions, but we do have some contact information. Sabrina, I know you're going to close this out. And David, what a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Oh, an honor to be included. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you also. Just if you don't know about the Pathways Alliance, go on all these links at this slide right now. It's an amazing members. And thank you to Aaron and I believe LPI also for their leadership in this space.
Yes, thank you, Aaron and David. We would like to also thank all of you for joining today's webinar. Please feel free to contact us on Twitter at Pathways Alliance. Feel free to email us at pathwaysalliance@innovateedunyc.org and also join our website, thepathwaysalliance.org. And we would also like to share David's contact information today. You can feel free to email him at info@ncgyo.org and visit their website at www.ncgyo.org as well. And please do not forget to subscribe to our newsletter. And we hope also that you will join our resource digest so that you can also get all the news on our latest webinars and all the resources that we have to share. We hope to cross paths again. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.